Good day! Today I will be discussing to you one of the famous literary pieces under the Renaissance period, the Shakespeare Sonnets. So before going to our discussion, let us know first our objectives. At the end of the discussion, you will be able to identify the themes in literary pieces to be discussed. And lastly, you will be able to explain how an author develops the point of view of the narrator or speaker in a text. So for our discussion under Shakespeare Sonnets, we will be divided our lesson into two sessions. So for our session for today, I will be explaining to you who is William Shakespeare, what is a Shakespearean sonnet. We will dig deeper on the Shakespeare sonnets together with the three major group sonnets by Shakespeare, and lastly, when were Shakespeare sonnets composed and published. For our last session, we will be tackling about the 8 most famous words of Shakespeare in the sonnet form. What are the other groupings and controversies faced by Shakespeare sonnets? We will also talk about the publishing of Shakespeare sonnets. And lastly, who were the Shakespeare sonnets dedicated to? So let us now discuss who is William Shakespeare. I have prepared here a short video clip for you to have a grasp on who is William Shakespeare. So let us watch the video and enjoy.
So who was William Shakespeare again? Well known, the Bard was an English author of famous plays about a lot of different things, and he lived during the Elizabethan era. But why is Shakespeare considered such a great artist? Born in England in 1564, he started his career as an actor and playwright as a member of the actors group the Lord Chamberlain's Company, which would later become the King's Company. They played in several theatres until they eventually built the famous Globe Theatre, their very first own stage. As there were only male members in the company, every role had to be played by men. But that wasn't the reason why Shakespeare's plays like Othello or Hamlet were very popular. To match the various tastes of a diverse audience, Shakespeare created texts of high complexity, containing relatively simple plots as well as subtle nuances. Being the key to his success, his stories also contained multiple interlocking plots, twists and confusions, containing something for everyone in the audience. So it wasn't just the common people who enjoyed his works, his company even played at the King's Court for the amusement of the aristocracy. Besides the plays, Shakespeare also wrote a multitude of sonnets and poems. At first, his work consisted almost exclusively of histories and comedies, like A Midsummer Night's Dream and Henry VI. Later, tragedies like Hamlet also became part of his portfolio. In his work, Shakespeare used his own special language, rich in metaphors and vivid images. He even created new words which became firmly established. As a consequence, many English words used today, like lonely and gossip, make their first appearance in one of his plays or sonnets. Shakespeare died in 1616 at the age of 52. But his plays are still performed today and amaze audiences. Shakespeare's stories have found their way into many of today's movies, books, and even music. And fortunately, nowadays, women can also play Juliet.
So upon watching this video, let us now dig deeper on who is William Shakespeare. So Shakespeare, also spelled Shakespeare, by name Bard of Avon or Swan of Avon. So his father is John Shakespeare and his mother was Mary Arden. So they had 8 children, but they lost 2 daughters as infants. So William Shakespeare became their eldest child. So he was born on April 26, 1564 at Stratford-upon-Avon, commonly known as Stratford. So, and at the age of 52, he died on April 23, 1616. So William Shakespeare is known to be an English poet, dramatist, and actor, often called the English national poet and considered by many to be the greatest dramatist of all time. So he is known as a prolific writer during Elizabethan and Jacobean ages of British theatre, also known as the English Renaissance. So his works include 38 plays, 2 narrative poems, and 154 sonnets and a variety of poems. He is a writer of great intellectual rapidity, perceptiveness, and poetic power. So he is known as an intelligent writer, good at noticing and understanding things that many people do not notice easily. So he has a poetic power which can manipulate language in such a way that it awakens the reader's imagination, senses, and perception. So Shakespeare seems to have wanted to be a poet as much as he sought to succeed in the theater. So Shakespeare's plays are perhaps his most enduring legacy, but they are not all he wrote. His poems also remain popular unto this day. Shakespeare also wrote 154 sonnets, we will going to discuss it later, which were collected and published posthumously in 1609. So it is believed that his plays and sonnets have spawned countless adaptations across multiple genres and cultures. So he continues to be one of the most important literary figures of the English language. So his work primarily covers the themes of time, the passage of time between the young and old, the mortality, love, beauty, infidelity, and jealousy. So his sonnets was divided into 3 major groups. So the first 126 of Shakespeare's sonnets are addressed to a young man. The last 28 addressed to a woman, a mysterious dark lady. So we will be discussing it to the next parts of our presentation. Lastly, Shakespeare's sonnets are often breathtaking, sometimes disturbing, and sometimes puzzling and elusive in their meaning. So Shakespeare's sonnets this not only tackles about love, but it also reflects time, change, aging, lust, absence, and infidelity. And he also tackles the gap between the reality and the ideal when it comes to the person you love the most. Let us now move on what is a Shakespearean sonnet. A Shakespearean sonnet always have things in common. First, all sonnets have 14 lines. Next, all sonnets are written in iambic pentameter. So what do we mean by iambic pentameter? When we say iambic, it refers to a foot or beat consisting of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. When we say pentameter, it simply means 5 meters. So when we combine it, iambic pentameter is defined as a line of writing that consists of 10 syllables in a specific pattern of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable or a short syllable followed by a long syllable. So iambic pentameter entails 10 syllables in a line. So it has a pattern of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. Usually, every second syllable was stressed. So it is a metrical speech rhythm that is common to English language. So nowadays, this sonnet form, is not only used in verse and poetry, but it also used nowadays in pop songs. So one good example of iambic pentameter, I have extracted an example from Sonnet 18, just like that. Next, many critics segment the sonnets into 3 groups. So Shakespearean sonnets are divided into 3 major groups. So the first group is all about the fair youth, or the sonnets 1 to 126. It is the first group of sonnets that is addressed to a young man with whom the poet has a deep friendship or relationship. Next, the Dark Lady sonnets from sonnets 127 to 152. So in the second sequence, the poet becomes infatuated with a mysterious woman and her relationship with the young man is unclear. Lastly, the Greek sonnets from Sonnets 153 and 154. This is the final two sonnets that are very different and draw upon the Roman myth of Cupid, to whom the poet has already compared his muses. So we will discuss these parts further to the next slides. So let's go deeper on the Shakespeare's sonnets. So Shakespeare's sonnets are composed of 14 lines, and most are divided into 3 quatrains and the final concluding couplet, rhyming ABAB, CD, EFEF, GG. So in a simpler sense, Shakespeare's sonnets entails one stanza that has 14 lines and written in iambic pentameter. So these lines are divided into 3 quatrains. When we say quatrains, it is a 4-line stanza, and a final couplet which consists of 2 lines of verse. So this sonnet form is like 3 quatrain and 1 couplet model. So in Shakespearean sonnet, the first quatrain has the rhyme scheme of ABAB. The second quatrain has the rhyme scheme of CD. The third quatrain has the rhyme scheme of EFEF, and lastly, the final couplet, which has only 2 lines, has the rhyme scheme of GG. So this form and rhyme scheme is also known as the English sonnet. So many later Renaissance English writers used this sonnet form, and Shakespeare did so particularly inventively. So Shakespeare used this sonnet form and make his work unique above other writers. So his sonnets vary its configurations, or the or what we call the arrangement, and its effects. Shakespearean sonnets use the alternate rhymes of each quatrain to create powerful oppositions between different lines and different sections, or to develop a sense of progression across the poem. So Shakespeare uses alternate rhymes such as the rhyme scheme of ABAB and many more. And different sections, he used quatrains, each quatrain consisting of 4 lines, to develop continuity and unity across the poem. So the use of alternate rhymes and powerful opposition in the poem helps to develop a great meaning, and will help to express the main theme of the poem. So the final couplet can either provide a decisive epigrammatic conclusion to the narrative or argument of the rest of the sonnet, or subvert it. So the final couplet, which consists of 2 lines, is used to summarize the first 12 lines. The first 12 lines are present a surprise ending. So the poet, which is William Shakespeare, comes to some kind of epiphany, or revealing a scene or a moment, or either teaches the reader a lesson to his final couplet. So let us now move on to the famous sonnets by Shakespeare, which is the Fair Youth, the Dark Lady, and the Greek sonnets. So Shakespearean sonnets are often breathtaking, sometimes disturbing, and sometimes puzzling and elusive in their meaning. So Shakespearean sonnets can be considered as unique and breathtaking. So its meaning entails various themes that enables the readers to be curious and learn something as well. We all know that the most well-known and important sonnets in the English language were written by Shakespeare. So his sonnets covered themes such as love, jealousy, beauty, infidelity, and the like. Although they are all poems of the high quality, there are some that have entered deeply in the consciousness of our culture. So there are numerous sonnets written by Shakespeare that became really famous until today. It may be about the various themes mentioned earlier, just like the about love, jealousy, infidelity, and such. Moreover, Shakespeare was the most popular playwright of the day, and his dramatic influence is still evident today, but the sonnet form, which was so very popular in Shakespeare's era, quickly lost its appeal. So it is believed that even before his death in 1616, the sonnet was not that fashionable or famous. 200 years after his death, there was a little interest on sonnets. Some others says that sonnets were regarded as only personal poems not intended for publication. But then, Shakespeare's sonnets, generally considered to be definitive, is that of the 1609 edition. So it was published by Thomas Thorpe, entitled Shakespeare Sonnets, never before imprinted. So this handful of sonnets are quoted regularly by people at all levels of modern Western life. So nowadays, Shakespeare sonnets are still famous. There are quotes from the sonnet that are being adopted by the readers. Next, let us now move on to the fair youth sonnet. So it is the sonnets from 1 to 126. The first 17 sonnets encourage this youth to marry and father children, because otherwise his beauty will die with him. So the first 126 sonnets seem to be addressed to a young man, some socially superior to the speaker. So Shakespeare addresses a young man with whom he may be stuck up a relationship. So sonnets 1 to 17 tries to convince the young man to marry and beget children so that the youth's beauty will not die when the youth dies. Furthermore, after this, the sonnets diversify in their subject. So starting in sonnet 18, when the young man appears to reject the procreation or to beget a child, the poet glorifies the young man's beauty and takes consolation that his sonnet will preserve the youth's beauty. Another, some erotically celebrate the master's mistress of my passion, while others reflect the lovely boy as a cause of anguish, and as the speaker desperately wishes for his behavior to be different to the cruelty that it sometimes is. So the other sonnets further tackles the poet's passion on the young man's double character that causes pain and suffering of the poet. And the first 126 sonnets subjects deeper, from begetting a child, from the speaker's pain and suffering, from the poets who glorifies the young man's beauty and such. So the subject differs, but it was addressed to a young man. So let us now move on to the Dark Lady sonnets. It is the sonnets from 127 to 152 that is to be addressed to a woman. So it is described that the Dark Lady as elusive and cruel, which results the speaker's pain and shame. So in a simpler sense, she was described as fascinating but a treacherous woman. So many of these sonnets reflect on the paradox of the fair lady's dark complexion. This woman's eyes, hair are raven black, and yet the speaker finds her most alluring. So many of these sonnets involves the poet's sexual relationship with the lady, so presumably a married woman. The relationship fluctuates between feelings of love, hate, and jealousy. So these sonnets emphasizes the poet's unhealthy dependency on the woman's attention and affection. And at the end of these sonnets, the poet admitted that he is a slave to his passion for the woman. And lastly, let us now move on to the last group of the Shakespearean sonnets, which is the Greek sonnets. The final two sonnets, from sonnets 153 and 154, focus on the classical god Cupid and playfully detail desire and longing. So these sonnets do not seem to directly relate to the previous collections of sonnets. So it is like the imitations of Greek epigrams devoted to Cupid, but then they form a sense of summing up the poet's relationship with the Dark Lady and the reflections on love or the poet's love that are expressed with detail in the previous sonnets. Now, let us move on when were Shakespeare's sonnets composed and published. The sonnets were probably written and perhaps revised between the early 1590s and about 1605. So the entirety of Shakespeare's sonnets were not formally published until 609. It is believed that his sonnets were circulating privately among his friends and without his consent. Versions of Sonnets 128 and 144 were printed in the poetry collection The Passionate Pilgrim in 1599. So presumably a year later, 5 of which are known to be Shakespeare's, 2 of the Dark Lady sonnets, which is Sonnets 138 and 144, and 3 of his poems are included to William Haggard's collection of poetry, The Passionate Pilgrim, which consists of 20 poems. So Shakespeare's 5 poems were printed in Haggard's miscellany without Shakespeare consent. So they were first printed as a sequence in 1609 with a mysterious dedication to Mr. W.H. So Shakespeare's sonnets became eminent on 1609 edition. So it was published by Thomas Thorpe, who is known as this reputable publisher who was notorious for stealing others' manuscripts. It was believed that the Shakespeare sonnets was published without his consent. So when he was 45 years old, 7 years before his death, a volume of his work entitled Shakespeare Sonnets appeared in London's 2 main bookshops. So, who is Mr. W.H.? Is he the young man of the sonnet? So, as with the Dark Lady, various candidates has been proposed. William Herbert, the 3rd Earl of Pembroke, and Rio Thesley, the Earl of Southampton. So, William Herbert, or the 3rd Earl of Pembroke, Shakespeare dedicated his first folio in 1623 to him and his brother. So, it was assumed that Shakespeare's sonnets was dedicated to William Herbert because Shakespeare was dedicated his first folio to him, dated in 1623. Next is Henry Rio Thesley, the Earl of Southampton. So, Henry Rio Thesley is one of Shakespeare's long poems. One of Shakespeare's long poems entitled Venus and Adonis, dated in 1593, was dedicated to Southampton. So it was believed that Shakespeare offered himself as the poet's patron of the young earl, since Henry Rio Thesley loves poetry and drama. So the dedication of Shakespeare's sonnets has led to the intense speculation on who is Mr. W.H. So it was addressed to Mr. W.H. So these are the 2 leading candidates who the critics and historians assumed to be Mr. W.H. And these are William Herbert and Henry Rio Thesley. So that's the end of our first session. So our last session, we will be talking about the 8 most famous works of Shakespeare in the sonnet form, and then we will also tackle the other groupings and controversies faced by the Shakespearean sonnets, and we will also tackle about when does the Shakespeare sonnets publish, and lastly, who were the Shakespeare's sonnets dedicated to. So thank you for listening. See you for our last session.